now you can say this is going to be a little shorter because unfortunately, as you saw, the Germans night fighting got real. I mean, to the last day, you had German night fighting aces taking out with the Schräg music and other things. You had battles where the German pilots were destroying 4 or 5 Lancaster bombers. There was one guy in the German, after the 7th Lancaster bomber he shot down, he had to stop. He says, I couldn't, he's like, I had to stop. I couldn't I couldn't kill anymore. Okay, this guy who was saying, he had a lot of problems, I think, psychologically after that. He killed, let's see, 7 times 7 is 49 men in one night. It was too much for him, even. So, of course, the Japanese, the Japanese were starting from a much, you could say, more lopsided position. Part of that was basically the most expensive weapon system in World War II was not the Manhattan Project, it was the B-29 Superfortress. Of course, the iconic, the crazy looking plane here, the influencing everything from the Millennium Falcon and to other things, to many, you could argue Gundam had, I think, one of the bombers based on this, getting more weeaboo. Because the B-29 was pressurized, right? Cabins, a computer automated gun system, which was also could be remote control, but it had primitive computers in it. The payload amount was, of course, greater than anything you could ever see. The engines were very, very powerful engines. They were so powerful that these things would blow up and burn all the time. Actually, a very expensive and still very temperamental bomber. Of course, the Japanese, now the story of the Japanese, now maybe this is overstated, but I have a feeling it's not. Because you definitely had this in the American military, where the Navy and the Army Air Force, the Navy and the Army Air Force were sort of rivals. Well, the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army, they were very much rivals as well. So basically, the Army used this. The K-145 became their night fighter, and this one here became the Imperial Japanese Navy night fighter. The J1N1, the Gecko, right, Moonlight, and the Toru. I forgot what Toru means, but as you can see, the similar thing. It's all the same things that you have here. Right, they mentioned the BF-110, right, less maneuverable in a single engine fighter. So even the Japanese knew that they had to do this. Of course, the bombing raids that they were fighting early on were further out from Japan. But when it starts coming to the home islands, you can see the Japanese are becoming very desperate. So they're pretty much doing similar things to the Germans. They're putting cannons into these planes, which you need to even begin to shoot one of these down. Of course, here's the B-29. Here's an example of the gunner, right? Remotely controlled power turrets. Side gunner aimed at turret using a gun sight he's operating during here. Of course, there's also, computerized. Right here, the gunners used a reflector sight connected to a gunnery computer. This is 1942, which set the attacking aircraft's wingspan and tracked it. This was fed into a computer, which took the observations, combined them with information provided by the navigator, and aimed the gun turrets correcting for lead, parallax, windage, and bullet drop. The system worked well. This is insane. These guns. Now, of course, the interesting thing was eventually this great computer system was not used because, just like with the Germans, the night fighter attacks. Okay. Also, remember, flak is taken out. If someone's getting hit, flak is taken out most of which if the enemy actually contributes to the bombing getting shot down, most of it's flak. 50% of your bombers are still getting shot down by flak. But in terms of the fighters here, Shimizu night attacks always came from behind. So they didn't even bother loading the turrets except for the tail gun. And interesting too, the tail gun on the B. These are the Japanese autocannons that they had. Of course, the Navy and the Army could be different from each other, these guys, but they have a similar idea. Okay, of these cannons, particularly the upward firing cannons. Now, this is at a different degree level, but it's essentially similar to the Schräg music. I don't know if the Japanese developed that independently. I think they did. It's interesting that the idea that, of course, the radar system, only the Navy had that, and only a couple of them had that, and this is what you had. So the Navy seemed to be better at actually shooting down B-29s. in the army. So there you got Curtis LeMay. Now, what do I think of Curtis LeMay? The firebombing of Tokyo was his idea. It was the single largest continuous killing event in the history of the planet. Um, I respect the guy way more than Arthur Harris. Of course, this guy flew 27 missions in Europe. He lead as the lead bomber. He's the guy that actually tightened the formations to give him a chance. He was in the Schweinfurt raids, going to and back, and survived those things. And this guy wanted to fly in the B-29s too. This guy was a brave man. Okay, but of course that's not what they wanted him, right? They wanted him, right? LeMay was a fixer. He made his reputation solving problems and meeting goals. Now I've gone over all the things with this, with the of course the idea he adapted the incendiary bombs, flying at low altitude. He knew that the night fighters weren't really much. Also, the Operation Starvation, the very underrated dropping of naval mines by the B-29s, which shut down 90% of Japanese shipping. Where the Navy was bitching about it as if we weren't all working together. But yeah, so obviously for the Japanese, they would have a very great disadvantage. But you had guys, right, the Navy was always a little better than the Army, or you could say they had better funding than the Army, right? Most of the Navy guys were enlisted, but this guy here, Kozono, another Navy guy, this guy was cool. This guy pushed for the Nightfighters. And this brave bastard, when Hirohito announced the surrender, he was one of the guys that led diehards refusing to surrender, dropping leaflets to say, keep fighting. Yeah, mad lad. So, of course, he got arrested by the Navy for insubordination. But anyway, this guy was kind of like the guy that led their night fighter idea through sheer force of will. A lot of resistance to this. Unfortunately, this resistance led to not really having much of an effect on the bombing. Of course, I've gone over the bombing of Japan, the fire bombings, but right. But you had Japanese aces. You had a couple of guys take out several B-29s. Of course, the same idea, right? Of course, the Germans, they had similar tactics. You go underneath and get them, right? Or you come from behind and get them. This was the technique a lot of guys wanted to do, which didn't work too well. And here's the thing, okay? The B-29 was a lot faster than these things. The main defense for the B-29 against Japanese night fighters, if they managed to find these things, because they had no radar, if they ran into these things, all they had to do was gun the engines, and these things were left in the dust. That arguably was the best defense that they had against the night fighters. But like I said, a couple of them got there. Of course, you know the Japs. A couple of them were frustrated, and so they rammed the B-29s with varying degrees of success. Right? Right. The primary defense against the night fighter was speed. They could easily outrun it. And of course, the interesting tail gun. They always thought the tail gun of the B-29 was very interesting. Okay, as they say here, right? The B-29 crew would spot and approach it. Right, the turrets were of little value in the end, but this was of value. The tail gun. Now, this is a 20 millimeter. Yeah, 20 millimeter cannon and 250 caliber machine guns. Look at this friggin' thing. So it looks pretty formidable, but it says here the bullet trajectories didn't match, so it made it difficult to hit an enemy with projectiles from all three weapons at the same time. But whatever, man, you're shooting. You know, you give them something to think about. And like as usual, like with the Germans and the Lancaster bombers, a lot of times the attacks were ambush. If they had an inkling there was a night fighter nearby, they were usually able to escape it. Most of the Japanese, when they shot down these B-29s, it was a total surprise, probably to both of them, and the guy got them. So interesting. And look at this, man. The B-29, what an amazing engineering thing, right? This is the pilot engineer. He had to run all the things. The flight engineer was like the third pilot, essentially. Anyway, just interesting. The Japanese, of course, had no chance, but to the guys, we're going to show some of the aces here. Sachio Endo, right? I showed you some of the German aces. I'll show you some of these guys. Right here, frustrated with the efforts to shoot bombers down. Some of these guys resort to ramming. You bet your ass. The Germans did that. Yokosuke Kokota. Yeah, this guy was another guy. Shot down a bunch of B-29s. 5 B-29s destroyed in a single mission. So, obviously, the Japanese were nowhere near as effective as the Germans were. They really couldn't be. But I also leave this off, okay? And this is an issue I have. You're like, well, it's just material, okay? It's no secret that the American and the Soviets were just two sides of the same coin. Everything is material, right? It's just materials are there just to be used and thrown away, right? You could argue that's an older, ancient sort of mindset, okay, that somehow found its way into modern thinking, okay? But look at this, the fate that befell most of the 20th Air Force combat veteran B-29s, these great machines, technical marvels that won the war against the Japanese, the most expensive military project in World War II. Okay, and the fate of these great machines have been they were basically unceremoniously dumped in a scrapyard on Tinian. There you go. Now you could say, well, they're just planes. They're just scrap metal. They're just thing. Who cares? What are you, anthropomorphic? I mean, there's something about this that bothers me. Okay, it's like Ryan Kelly's Heroes. The only M4s that were working were what they gave the Yugoslavians against the Soviets, right? Because you didn't have working ones in America. Okay. It's just there's something here. You see, to discard it. It's not much of a stretch that you did. Well, they were discarding. They were discarding human material for many years, even before this. This is something that bothers me looking at that. It's very reflective of the American way. Whatever. Dedicated to the heroes. What heroes am I talking about? I think you guys know.